So what Prigozhin, the leader of the Wagner Group, says is the optimistic scenario for the Russians is they get to hold on to what they have. Wagner's 1-hour stream that he did after the capture of Bakhmut and then the cross-border raids into Belgorod. Wagner's leader, Yevgeny Prigozhin, released a over 1-hour interview where he answered a host of questions. And let's just say that the interview was a gigantic clusterfuck. He talked about a whole host of issues, but the entire video, the entire over 1 hour of time, is filled almost entirely with him attacking either the Russian Ministry of Defense or him dealing out doomsday predictions with a bunch of memes in the middle. And now we're gonna watch this clip of Yevgeny Prigozhin talking about how Ukraine very much has a chance to restore not the 2022 2022 invasion borders, but the 2014 borders, including Crimea. Now, before we watch this clip where he talks about that and we read a few lines about that, I want to show you guys, I want to go through some notes that I have on my other screen here about things that Yevgeny Prigozhin said in this over 1 hour interview that we just don't have enough time to go through the entirety of. So let me go down the list I have here. First off, Yevgeny Prigozhin, the leader of the Wagner Group, declares the mission of capturing Bakhmut accomplished, and then immediately says afterwards that he's going to be leaving Bakhmut to reform his units, abandoning it essentially and leaving it for the Russian MOD to defend. The same Russian MOD that he says is at fault for the crushing of the Russian flanks north and south of the city, the same Russian MOD that he's been lambasting as unable to capture the city and unable to protect the city. The entirety of his lambasting of the MOD can basically be amounted to Russian Ministry of Defense terrible, Wagner good, screw Shoigu, the Russian defense minister. He says that Shoigu's son-in-law shakes his ass in the UAE. His words, not mine. That again, a reference to the MOD being terrible. He says that more people died in Bakhmut than died during the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. Now, when he says this, he obviously does not want to, he's not including the civilian population of Afghanistan or Afghans in the death toll for the war in Afghanistan. But when he's talking about the death toll on the Soviet side from Soviet armed forces, he is saying that this one battle, the attack to capture Bakhmut, inflicted more losses on the Russian army than 10 years of fighting in Afghanistan. That's a pretty drastic statement. Now, I do need to put a disclaimer here, considering that we're talking about Yevgeny Prigozhin, leader of the Wagner Group here, that even though there's a motivation, people would say, oh, well, this is a guy who's fighting for the Russians, so he wants to make the Russians look as good as possible. That isn't necessarily the case. While obviously, when he trashes the Russians or says some private information or embarrasses them, a lot of it could be true, but a lot of it could also be false. The reason being that Yevgeny Prigozhin is doing his best to make the Russian Ministry of Defense look terrible and himself look good as he continues to jostle with them for resources, for influence, and the favor of Vladimir Putin, who needs Yevgeny Prigozhin not only to do head-on assaults in city like Bakhmut, but also needs Yevgeny Prigozhin to act as a power balance against the military, which he fears because he thinks that it's possible that somebody could rise out of the ranks of the military, some hero figure, and challenge him, take him on, and then take him over with, say, example, like some military coup. And if Yevgeny Prigozhin is making the Ministry of Defense look terrible and is jostling for power with them, then the Ministry of Defense would look too terrible in order to take his place. They cannot raise a hero figure, and they're too distracted to organize a coup or organize opposition to Putin. He says that they killed about 50,000 Ukrainian servicemen with 50 to 75K wounded. Of course, those are Wagner numbers of their own estimates. It's their own estimates for Ukrainian casualties. I would say take them with a grain of salt. He says that Wagner losses to the Ukrainians was 3 times less. That's almost certainly a lie, definitely considering the human wave tactics that they were utilizing in the city of Bakhmut as they just slammed their head against the front of it time and time again to take it after 10 months of fighting should have taken them a tremendously short amount of time when you're considering the fact that, you know, it's a city of 70,000 people and they wanted to take a city of 3.5 million in Ukraine within a week. Should take them a lot less than, you know, double the length of the Battle of Stalingrad. There's a bunch of other stuff here as well. He rants about how awesome him taking prisoners was. For example, him, you know, recruiting the murderers, recruiting the rapists, saying that it's good for them, good for society, and good for the war. He then insults Shoigu and Gerasimov, who's a Russian general again, etc., etc., etc. Now, there's a lot more stuff here that I think is interesting, and you guys can go check out some more translations online. Anyway, there's a bunch of stuff in here that you can go check out on your own. But the main thing I want to focus on, you can go check out, there's other translations of this online. The main thing I want to focus on when it comes to this Prigozhin interview, I know there's an hour and I have to be selective with what I choose, is what he says about a optimistic scenario for the Russians in this war and a pessimistic scenario for the Russians in this war. So what Prigozhin, the leader of the Wagner Group, says is the optimistic scenario for the Russians is they get to hold on to what they have. That means no capturing of Kramatorsk. That means no capturing of Zaporozhye, no capturing of Kiev, no big Russian victory upon the horizon, but that the optimistic scenario for the Russians is that they're able to hold off a Ukrainian counteroffensive and merely hold on to what they have right now. He says that that is unlikely. What he does says, what he thinks is likely, is that the Russians get pushed out of the territory that they hold right now with the upcoming counteroffensive, which he thinks that the Russian Ministry of Defense cannot handle, leading possibly to the return of the 2014 Ukrainian borders with a devastating Russian loss in this war. Let's check out what he has to say here. There is an optimistic scenario and a pessimistic scenario. Here's the optimistic scenario, which I don't think will happen. Europe and America will get tired of the Ukrainian conflict. China will make everyone sit at the negotiating table. We agree that everything Russia stole is ours now. Now, to be clear, I think some people saw that word and they're like, Dylan, that was dishonest. He uses the word stole literally. It's not, oh, he said everything Russia has captured. No, he uses the word stole here. He is saying that Russia stole this from Ukraine in his own terminology. Everything we didn't steal stays theirs. This is the optimistic scenario. It's unlikely to happen. And now the pessimistic scenario. Ukraine is getting rockets. They're getting prepared with troops. They have Leopard tanks. They have good leadership. Even though there are reports that Zaluzzi is dead, he's not. And other commanders as well, and this is good for our operation. But even if there is no Zaluzzi there, there's others. There will always be someone else, because the main thing they do is that they don't castrate their leaders. That's why unequivocally they will keep attacking and advancing. They will try to counterattack. It is highly likely that this counterattack will succeed in some places. In Artemovsk, they are actively crawling around the flanks, and later they will try to cut it off. Go deeper in the direction of Luhansk, and they will try to restore the 2014 borders. And this can happen very easily. They will attack Crimea, they will try to blow up the Crimean bridge, they will cut supply routes, and there is a big chance that this will not turn out good for us. And this is why we need to prepare for a heavy war. What do we need to do? What we need to do is not lose all of Russia. Because in the condition we are in right now, we can lose all of Russia. Now, I want you guys to keep some things in consideration here. Number one, yes, this is a person fighting for the Russians, leading the Wagner Group, fighting the Ukrainians, giving this doomsday prediction for the Russians, and a very decent prediction for the Ukrainians. And I don't think that should be discounted. I do not think that that should be disregarded. I do think that this shows that the situation for the Russians is bad, and bad enough to at least merit this criticism, even if he's hyperbolic, which is the second point I want to put forward, is that he is scuffling with the Russian Ministry of Defense. That is what he's trying to do right now. He's trying to convince them to give him the prison conscripts, to give him the artillery shells, to give him the rockets, to give him the armored vehicles, to give him reinforcements, to give him supplies, him money, so he can use it in the Wagner Group and expand its reach not only in Ukraine, but also in operations in Africa and the Middle East, around the world. Maybe the Central African Republic, maybe Libya, hey, maybe even backing up the rapid support forces in Sudan. Who knows what type of wacky plan Yevgeny has for the Wagner Group once this is all said and done. But needless to say, he is scuffling with the official Russian Ministry of Defense, Defense Minister Shoigu, and the rest of Putin's cronies for resources and trying to jostle for power with them. And so that is a motivating factor that's going to make him intensify how disastrous the situation is to at least a slight degree. So even if this is a devastating prediction for the Russians, and this is good hopium, okay? I think this is more like a hopium patch. You know how they have tobacco patches where people put like patches on their arm to give them like a tiny amount of tobacco so they can slowly get off of it? This is the equivalent of that, but for hopium and for Ukraine supporters. It's like a patch you put on your arm to help you with the hopium. But it's not pure Colombian hopium. There's problems with it. And his motives make it so we can only take this with a grain of salt. But still a disastrous prediction for the Russian armed forces that we would never have seen a year ago.